Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero, the show that revolutionizes personal engagement in the world and fortification of your life. Let's get to it. We're brought to you by Fox & Sons, foxandsons.com, the best place to get your BBC. I never start my day with anything less than BBC in my mouth, and I suggest if you like BBC, you go to foxandsons.com, get that big bold coffee, and put it in your mouth. foxandsons.com, promo code 0 at checkout for 18% off on any order $25 or more. That's foxandsons.com for that BBC big bold coffee. Put it in your mouth, baby. And the Marc Clair Show. If you enjoyed Marc Clair with Lions of Liberty, you're going to really dig the Marc Clair Show. Marc Clair has gone beyond the realm of politics to dig into the esoteric meaning of life in all sorts of different avenues, whether it be entrepreneurship, ghosts, goblins, Bigfoot, demonic entities, religion. Marc Clair is diving into all of it, and he's not afraid to tackle any task. So go check out the Marc Clair Show. Thank you, as always, Tom Burton, for the music. And you can find this show and many more at the Libertarian Institute.org. That's the Libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarlane, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, and a host of other writers like Kim Robinson. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and keep track of everything that we are doing for you. And we are recording. All right. I'm here with Mr. Jim Jatras. How are you doing, Jim?
Great to be here. It's a privilege and an honor.
I appreciate you coming back. Some people don't want to come back. Sometimes I'm a little rough on the edges. So, and Mr. Daniel McAdams, how you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great. It's an honor to be in such great company.
I appreciate both of y'all. I knew this would be a really good conversation, so I'm excited to dig in and get into what's going on and all these little nuances that probably a lot of people, including myself, are missing with the Russia-Ukraine war that you two will be, able to spot and kind of point out and, show us. I think I want to start. I heard I was reading the other day that there was an attack on a town in Russia, and that Ukrainian-backed militia or Russian separatists or whatever, anti-Putin Russians were actually carrying out these attacks. So what are y'all's thoughts on that initially?
Jim, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. To start with, there's no evidence that I can see that any anti-Putin Russians had anything to do with it, that this was purely a Ukrainian operation supported with some level of support from the United States and other Western powers. What that consisted of entirely, I don't know. A lot of people claim, and I think with some justice, that this was a diversion from the fall of Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians wanted to change the topic in the media, which it really didn't succeed in doing that. I think there's probably was something else at work there too, though, and that is the fact that given the way the war is going, the only hope Kiev may have is to try to somehow get the United States and NATO dragged into the war directly. And my guess is what they were hoping to do is provoke some kind of Russian reaction that would then serve as a pretext for saying, oh, now NATO has to become involved. I think that's probably what the primary motivation was. Obviously, at least so far, it hasn't had that impact.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim. I think there are a couple of aspects to it. I think one is that there's a bit of asymmetric warfare going on. Obviously, as you suggest, Jim, the war is not going. Certainly, it's not going to the extent that Ukraine is going to launch a massive counteroffensive. I would be surprised in a conventional way. So I suspect this is some asymmetric way of, as you say, either to provoke a reaction, because I don't think that can be judged alone. I think you have to judge it in the context of the drone attack on the Kremlin and a few other very similar operations that we've seen. I think they're trying to provoke a response, but I also think they're trying to sow a sense of fear and confusion, both in Russian society and in the Russian government, because what went along with this supposed incursion into Belgorod was a lot of crazy disinformation about helicopters and cities being taken over. None of that actually happened. It was all magnified in social media and et cetera. So these kinds of things, in my opinion, at least, they kind of have a whiff of some of our three-letter agencies.
Do you think that I heard rumors that the drone attack on the Kremlin was actually a false flag, that it was something Russia was doing. Now I don't know Russian foreign policy or the way these guys think over there. I can barely keep up with the way the U.S. military, acts. So, why would they? Is there any good reason why they would interact this false flag? Are they losing like popular sentiment, or is something like that going on where they may have to interact with a false flag and encourage the population to support the military?
Daniel, why don't you go first on this one?
Okay, sure. There's really absolutely no upside if the Russians tried to do a false flag. I mean, according to all opinion polls in Russia, the special military operation is extremely popular. President Putin's ranking is very, very high among the Russian people. The opposition is primarily those who believe he's not going hard enough. They don't like the special military operation. They want a complete war. Certainly, the political opposition in Russian parliament argues for a stronger response. So that wouldn't be to appease those types. It wouldn't be to get people on board with the war, because they are on board with the war. And there simply just wouldn't be there would be no reason for Putin to do something to make Russia look so weak and vulnerable. That makes them look foolish and stupid. So I just don't see I don't see any incentive for them to do this as a false flag.
Yeah, and I think what Daniel put his finger on there is that to the extent there is opposition to Russia to the current war in Russia, it's largely coming from people who are saying, why aren't we wrapping this up? Why aren't we hitting them harder? And why aren't we prosecuting this war with greater vigor? That's where I think you also get some of this loud mouthing coming from Prigozhin, that's in many respects critical of the way the war is being waged. This is the sponsor of the Wagner group. There's a little bit of Vladimir Zhirinovsky kind of loudmouthism going on there. I mean, he likes to say outrageous things and things like that, and that's part of the political theater you get with populism in any country, it seems, but certainly in Russia as well. But there is a significant problem, I would say, is that in the Russian structure of power, you have an awful lot of people who, for want of a better word, are just Western-style liberals, that they don't really give a damn about the Russian national interests any more than our liberals here care about American national interests, and they want to see this war wrapped up as soon as possible, not necessarily in terms of accomplishing the military goals, but in terms of just getting back to business and normal so they can go back to taking their wives shopping at Harrods and send their kids off to school and go back to the good old days when they could live the life of Riley mostly in the West and let everybody else in Russia fend for themselves. I don't, this is part of the gulf, and let's not deny that it exists in Russian society between, intelligentsia and narod, the people, the folk, that goes all the way back to Peter the Great. And that's something that has to be managed by the Russian government. You do have people within the government who are not of that ilk, but you do still have a lot of those people, and it's just something that the authorities have to deal with.
I was paying attention, especially with the start of this war. Well, I mean, we can talk about the start of the war if you want to, but at least the start of the invasion. I was paying a lot of attention to Alexander Dugin, and one of the things he said is that he felt like Putin had waited too long to invade Ukraine, that this is something that Putin should have done in 2014, that by waiting so long, he was actually should put Russia in a weak position. Do you either of you see that as valid criticism of Putin?
Well, I mean, if I can jump in, Jim, if you don't mind. Now, Putin himself said that a couple of months ago. He said, one of my biggest mistakes was waiting this long. And I'm paraphrasing the essence of what he said. But and I'm sure Jim knows better than I, but I think a lot of the interim was spent really developing the military industrial sector in Russia and preparing for this war. They saw the war coming, in my opinion, all along. They saw Ukraine being rearmed and trained to fight Russia. And so I think they also needed to ramp up their capabilities. And we're seeing now that they did a decent job. So it's hard to know, did they benefit from these years in really putting together, some pretty serious technology we're seeing on display now, defeating anything that the U.S. can throw out there, at least from what we can see. Maybe they benefited from that. But I think there is a sentiment on his part, especially, when Minsk II came around and he pulled back from the precipice of really probably a victory at the time. I don't know, Jim, you probably have a better handle on that.
No, I think you're right. It's sort of the damned if you do, damned if you don't problem. That militarily, yes, the Russians probably could have just beat the Ukrainians silly much more easily in 2014 because Ukraine had not had a chance to build up its military with NATO help during the intervening years. Russia has become stronger as well. What's the balance of military force at that point? Has it been a net advantage for Russia? Probably it has. I think the bigger question is that could Russia have withstood the sanctions that the West was bound to impose upon them in 2014 the way they have weathered those sanctions now? The Russian financial and economic structure was nowhere near as strong in 2014 as it is now. Plus, their relationship with China wasn't as cemented as strongly as it is now. And the growth of what we might call a Eurasian bloc or a global South bloc or a BRICS bloc, whatever we want to call it, that in terms of what is the real war, actually, Ukraine is just a theater of a global war. In terms of the real war, the Russian position and those of their allies in all but name against the dollar-denominated U.S. Global American empire, the GAY, is much stronger than it was in 2014. And frankly, that's where the real war is. To my mind, the real mistake on the Russian side has been, and I hope they've learned their lesson, but I'm not sure, is that they think they genuinely did not want war in 2014, and have been amazingly naive, it seems to me, in believing assurances from their Western partners that they would carry out any of their obligations, not only Minsk, but even when they delivered those ultimata in late 2021, asking for assurances. What kind of assurances could they possibly have gotten? And then even after the war began, a month later, when it looked like there was going to be some kind of a peace deal in Istanbul, would they really have accepted those assurances that were given by the Western powers if a deal had been reached? I'm told by all of my interlocutors, okay, that's it. They realize there's no deal possible. They're going to do what they need to do. I'm not so sure. The chairman of the Armed Services Committee, what's his name? McCall, I think.
McCall from Texas,
from Texas was saying that Yeah, that what the Ukrainians need to do is launch their offensive, make some gains, and then call for a ceasefire. Are the Russians stupid enough to fall for that again? I don't know. It seems that the most important thing in life is that you need to first know yourself and then know your enemy. The Russians sort of know themselves. They've got sort of a handle on their enemies. And of course, the Western leaders have known neither themselves nor their enemies. So it's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim.
Go ahead, Dan, if you got something.
No, I was just going to say that's a great point to bring the political atmosphere and the understanding. I mean, what we've seen. I mean, and I love the way you said what the real war is, because that's what I've been thinking and not been able to express as well as you have, because that is the real war, and it's Russia and China is the big deal. But look what's happening on the sidelines. Look at how China is brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Look how Syria has been welcomed back into the Arab fold. This whole bloc in the Middle East is developing, and it's developing contra the U.S. and the gay, as you call it appropriately, Jim. It's phenomenal. And you look at countries like India, now nominally signing on to this global South plan, with its archenemy China. It's incredible to see what's happening in the real war, which is, you're right, perfectly right, a global war.
Mm.
Yes, and of course we also have the likelihood of a Turkey-Syria rapprochement as well, brokered
Yes.
by the Russians, with again Chinese support, and all of these countries in economic and financial terms turning more and more to the BRICS bloc. And the other thing is, again, gets back to the whole gay thing, is that I like to call this World War Trans, because there is so much about the Western policy that it insists on this crazy gender ideology and all the stuff we see, all the stuff we see going on with Bud Light and the Dodgers and Target, that is destroying the Western societies, that we want to impose then on all Eastern Europe, which is much former communist Eastern Europe, which is much more resistant to this than Western Europe is, and even frankly a lot of non-Christian countries, India, China, and others that are not Christian, but at least they're normal human beings. They realize that all of this stuff that's being peddled by the West is destructive, not just of Christianity and normal Christian moral values. It's destructive of human life in general. It's anti-natalist, it's anti-family. And if we were looking for a way to market how, frankly, satanic the ideology of the Western countries has become, we couldn't have found a better way to do it.
Yeah, right. Literally Satanism.
Well, and it's that ESG DEI agenda. And one of the things, whenever I wrote my article on ESG that went up at the Libertarian Institute last year, one of the things I wanted to make sure that people understood is it's governance to the lowest common denominator, right? The way that it works is let's say America has lax ESG laws, but the corporation, let's say Bank of America or Wells Fargo, wants to do business in Hungary, and Hungary has these really, really strict laws. Now every customer of Wells Fargo in the United States is then that they are beholden to the laws of Hungary, right? And their DEI ESG laws. And so it's this weird weaponization, using the corporation as as almost like a military arm. It's almost like a militant corporate structure in order to bend the American people or the people around the world to the whims of the governments without doing it by violating the Constitution. They just lean on a corporation and have the corporation do it. And so therefore you force globalism through a corporate structure, and you intervene in the different governments around the world through the corporations that the governments are doing business with. Right. And one of the things they've talked about openly is getting tribal communities and tribal countries beholden to the technological advancements of the West in order to lock these traditional communities up under the same rules that we live under. And we're watching it play out in war form in Russia, and people don't understand that that's what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. A good friend of mine, Anya Parampil, She works with Max Blumenthal over at the Gray Zone. She did a great piece on Ukraine and how Ukraine is being touted as the world's first digital state, where everything about you is online, and it supposedly streamlines the whole thing. It seems like an experiment on exactly what you're talking about, Tommy. And also, I would say that the whole COVID, the 2 years of COVID, was exactly that. And we see it now through the Twitter files that's exactly how you describe it, was corporations doing the bidding of governments to silence dissent.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of libertarians kind of miss the big picture here, where they think in very binary terms: government bad, private sector good. So if a corporation does something the government is prohibited from doing, that's okay. That's a business decision. They're a private corporation. Well, to start with, corporations themselves are creations of the government. They don't exist except the government passes laws allowing for the creation of a legal person, which is itself a fiction. They're not natural persons at all. But let's face it, our corporatocracy and our government are one big entity of power, one big kind of a recrudescence of the Soviet nomenclatura, where they basically are one entity, whether you're this week in the private sector and next week back in the public sector. It's just one big structure of power. So the idea that somehow with the private-public distinction when it comes to them and us, which is what it really boils down to, is the same in my opinion.
Well, I think that's why the CIA and the OSS focus so heavily on international bankers to start these organizations was so that they had that internal dialogue with the corporations, and the government was then able to absorb the corporation to do the bidding of the government. And usually, as like if you read, like I'm sure both of y'all have read Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, and he talks about how it was being used overseas. But what we're starting to see now is it's being used here against us. And that's what's different. And that's why it feels like we're under so much more pressure today than we've ever been under, is because the CIA is being utilized here at home through the corporate structure to funnel and force our will into that of the government.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember when I was working with the British Helsinki group overseas, and we were monitoring these elections, we were monitoring the very, very early iterations of what became the color revolutions. These are the pre-color revolution color revolutions. And we saw what was happening. We saw the techniques that were being employed by the US government to overthrow other governments that it didn't like. And we always said at the time, they keep perfecting this. One day this is going to come to our shores. We kept saying, oh, this is like 30 years ago. And we said it over and over again. And you're absolutely right, Tom. That's exactly what's happened. It's exactly come to our shores. This is what they've perfected overseas. It's kind of totalitarianism.
When getting on the color revolutions, this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, is the people want to act like when Russia invaded Ukraine, that was the beginning of this war. But this war has been going on for a long time. And I kind of look at like 2011 as the beginning of the war. And Russia didn't really understand. I don't think Russia understood what they were dealing with under the Snow Revolution until 2014. And there was the Maidan. Am I saying that? Is that right? Maidan?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Until Maidan happened in 2014. In 2015, Russia reacted to that, and they kicked out all Western NGOs out of their country. I think that was when they finally realized, oh, okay, now this is what we're dealing with. We're going to have to take drastic steps. And so I think that's why they tie it back to 2014 and say it was a mistake not to invade in 2014, because the West had already been like involved in their politics, and there was a war occurring right on their borders, and they just weren't aware of it until it was too late.
Yeah, and I suppose the good news is, to some extent, some countries seem to have figured out how these color revolutions work, and are able to thwart them. There was one a couple of years ago in Belarus that failed. There was one just around the time the war started in Kazakhstan that failed. Some people would argue the recent change of government in Thailand was essentially a color revolution that perhaps succeeded, but we'll have to see how that one turns out. So, back when these things started, they seem to go off without fail each time. Actually, the biggest tragedy, I would say, is that the color revolution that occurred in this country over the Trump administration and then culminating in 2020 was successful, that they were applying to the very same formula that they have applied successfully in other countries. And in fact, something has come out recently that I was not aware of, that one of the people who was advising the January 6th insurrectionists was a Serbian guy who I'll bet my bottom dollar was connected with Otpor and Canvas and groups like this to tell them how to do that, how to go. Hey, this guy really knows the plan. They overthrow Milosevic. We can do the same thing to stop a stolen election. I mean, talk about naive. These people just got, marched in like lambs to the slaughter by somebody who supposedly knew what the methodology is, but was working for the other side. It's really incredible now what's happened in our country, and frankly, Tommy and Daniel, I don't see any way out of this. Certainly not through normal political processes. I mean, you got to figure that the same mechanisms that work in 2020. When I went to Serbia in 2022, right after the election, the first question I got from all the news media there was, "So, Mr. Jatras, were these elections also stolen?" So people there understand it. Most Americans, I don't think, do. Even a lot of people who are convinced that our electoral system is compromised. Oh gosh, all we have to do is figure out mail-in balloting better, and we're going to win next time. I mean, come on.
The consultants. Well, when January 6th happened, Dr. Paul immediately says this is not an insurrection. I mean, this is ridiculous. And I won't say the name, but for the first time ever, we had one of our board members quit the board and said, this is outrageous. You can't say that. Of course, it was an insurrection. So they made it like you couldn't talk about it. If you talk about it, then you're as crazy as Trump, who's lying. And you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right, Jim.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is you look at 2022. I'm not shilling for the Republican Party here, because they're, in many respects, they're Tweedledee and Tweedledum. There are some things that I think the Republicans are better on, but they're hardly the solution to the problem. But if you look at 2022, there's no way the Republicans should not have won big in those elections. But you notice that the Democrats didn't seem to be worried about it. Instead, we got a speech by Biden just before the election that anybody who doubts the results of these elections is some kind of a traitor or an insurrectionist, or they're working for the Russians or something like that. What did he know that the rest of us did not know, what the pollsters did not know, or at least the pollsters pretended not to know? Why is it that with a man who's a walking corpse in the White House, they don't seem to be worried about 2024 either? Yeah. What do they know that the rest of us don't know? And again, especially if you've got people on the other team, the red team, playing ball with you anyway, in what is essentially a fixed game, where the other side is maybe going to take a dive. I don't think most Americans have really come to grips with this thing yet.
I mean, Biden's numbers at this point are the worst ever. So I don't see, you're right, I don't see how you could not be in an absolute panic. And you have RFK Jr., who's polling at like 25% without getting any coverage whatsoever. And they don't seem to be worried about it.
Well, what's weird about the RFK Jr. thing is I was listening to, I'd seen he had gone on Part of the Problem with Dave Smith, and then saw Megyn Kelly had interviewed him. And then I saw that segment with Breaking Points where that crystal ball chick just started shilling for Pfizer, like just openly just acting like she worked for Big Pharma. And so I was like, okay, so who else is talking about RFK Jr.? Because I didn't know that he was going to make a splash at all. Honestly, I thought the fact that he has that disease that causes him trouble to speak was going to be a real hindrance on him. And so I didn't even take it seriously when I first saw it. And so I noticed the fifth column was talking about him. And they did an entire segment, I want to say it was like 35 minutes, just basically painting him as this wacky, kooky conspiracy theorist. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. You know, like I kind of expect something like that out of Michael Moynihan, but Camille Foster and Matt Welch, it kind of took me off guard that they were going along with it.
Well, Matt Welch is a gatekeeper for the regime, so that doesn't surprise me at all. He always has been.
Oh, okay. Well,
but,
you would know better than me.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's a good litmus test, though, how somebody like RFK Jr. gets treated by various figures. If they treat him dismissively, like you say, act like a shill for big pharma, you could ding ding ding, the light bulb goes on. Okay, I guess I know which side that guy's playing for. And at the same time, if you have somebody actually listen to what the man has to say and treats it seriously, because this is a guy. On some issues he is just a conventional Democrat, and I wouldn't agree with him. But on other things, it takes some real guts to do and say the stuff he's been saying. Starting with the fact that he doesn't say he says that Sirhan did not kill his father, and that's that's getting into really really dangerous territory with regard to some of the big events in America over the last few decades that you're just not allowed to talk about. You're really stepping on the toes of some very powerful and dangerous people.
Yeah. What's amazing, I think, about this whole RFK Jr. phenomenon, and this is just personal, it's close to me, but I've never seen Dr. Parr more excited about a candidate, probably including himself, than he is about RFK Jr. He mentions it all the time. He's watching it very, very closely, and he's very, very interested in it. And the thing about RFK Jr. that I think is fascinating is that he's not afraid to learn. You see, the people that are in politics who they have everything set, and that's it. He's not afraid to learn because he said some pretty off the mark things about Russia and the Ukraine war a while ago. And people brought it up. Oh, he's conventional. Oh, he's just part of the blob. But then and I know this for a fact because I spoke to Colonel McGregor, he reached out through an intermediary and said, I want to talk to Douglas McGregor. I want to hear what he has to say because it looks like he has some interesting insights about Ukraine. So this mutual friend of theirs put them in touch, and he listened, and he had a great interview with him on his podcast, RFK Jr.'s podcast, and he took on board a lot of the things that the colonel was saying. So someone like that who's willing to listen to the opposition and consider and take those points on board if they work, that is a pretty admirable thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think Daniel, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, to be fair, Daniel, though, there's somebody else who's willing to learn. Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis answered Tucker Carlson on Ukraine and actually said something sensible. And within 2 days, he had beat a hasty retreat because he learned from his donors that you're not allowed to say that. And he reversed himself in lightning speed. So, hey, he's educable as well. Let's not lose sight of that.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, by the way.
Sorry about that, Tommy.
No,
there's a lot of stuff coming out right now on Twitter about one of his top aides, who actually is very close to. You've seen about this woman. She's very close to Zelensky. She worked for Saakashvili. Her first job after college was for John McCain, and she lived for a long time overseas in places like Georgia, where the U.S. has had a very, very strong. And she started several NGOs in Georgia, just out of the blue. Let's start an NGO. Where'd the money come from? And she is one of his top aides. I think she's his press secretary and most likely a foreign policy advisor, an absolute neocon with a lot of the hallmarks of some very spooky stuff about her.
Yeah,
Karl Rove is supporting DeSantis. I don't think you need to say much more than that. And by the way, I'm going to go out on a limb here. If it turns out that DeSantis is the nominee, I don't rule out that whoever they is, might actually let him win because, it's sort of a Leninist one step forward, two steps back. That I'm sure even some of the Democrats realize it was some of this crazy drag queen stuff. They're out over their skis in terms of how much the public is actually coming along with them. And it would be a good move for them in a way to allow the other team to win, to preserve the facade that the system is still intact, that we're having a conservative government now, but somebody who's right on the reservation when it comes to the real issues of war and peace and the control that the deep state has, and then let the revolution, cool itself a little until all of these things become mainstream, and then they can go back to really pressing the pedal to the metal in a few years. Right? Again, maybe that's too conspiracy theory-ish, or maybe it's a spoiler alert. I don't know.
You Hegelian, you. But COVID fits right. COVID fits perfectly in that too, though, because there's so much pressure. People keep dropping dead. People keep having, right. So, and that is a real problem too. So you have someone in there who's like, hey, I was right all along on that. And as you say, it cools the heels. I mean, what you say, Jim, it's absolutely insane, and that's why it makes perfect sense.
Well, the way I look at it is they almost have to bring in the opposition. They have to bring in a conservative, because they got to get their foot soldiers active. And once the foot soldiers get active out on the ground, then it makes the public remember why we voted Democrat. We voted Democrat because we didn't like this. This happens if we don't vote Democrat. So we got to keep voting Democrat. So that interruption with a conservative or a Republican, whether it's a real conservative or a fake conservative, you could get into that, however you want to, but that it's a continuation. Like when we talk about this Russia-Ukraine war is a global war, what we're talking about right now is we're witnessing pieces of that war taking place in the American political sphere. And we're actually maneuvering ourselves through a war. Like, that's why I think people like a Tim Pool are kind of naive when they talk about a civil war. Like, no, it's not a civil war. This is the world war. The world war is this battle. And what it is, it's a battle that's so esoteric, like the average person can't wrap their mind around the natures of good and evil that we are actually facing and we're maneuvering. And some of these things are so hard to distinguish from each other because we've become such a materialist and a secular society that we don't recognize or understand what it is that we're staring down the barrel of.
That's a great point, Tom.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a distinction between civil war and global war. You're right, it's a global war, but it's a war that cuts down the middle of almost every country, at least in European civilization, including the United States, that the same division you find throughout the world also divides Americans. I like to say that in 1861, they prayed to the same God, they read the same Bible, they honored the same founding fathers. We don't even agree what a woman is or what pronouns to use. That just the level of alienation within our country is the same one that exists globally. One footnote back to the politics. I don't think they would go so far, though, to let Trump get reelected if he were the Republican nominee. I just don't see. I think they see him as so erratic and dangerous and unpredictable that, and just a kind of an irrational hatred of him because they see him as kind of an avatar of all those deplorable types in flyover country that they absolutely loathe, that they simply could not tolerate it. Frankly, I don't think he's that big of a danger to them as they might think he is. If he did get elected, I would think that it would be just as chaotic and frankly unproductive as his first administration was, that he would be in no more control of the executive branch of government a second time around, and probably less so than he was the first time around. Has he learned anything? My guess is probably not much. That he has, hey, look, his virtues and his vices are the same qualities that allow him to tell the smart and beautiful people to go to hell are the same qualities that prevent him from learning anything or thinking anybody knows something he doesn't know. So I don't really see much salvation from that quarter either.
I think the good test case on that is COVID. I mean, he could have very easily extricated himself from all the blame for the lockdowns and for the terrible vaccine by saying, look, I listened to these idiots. They were put into my administration. I shouldn't have listened to them. I made a mistake, but I've corrected it. He's still talking about the beautiful vaccine, I mean, I'm not revealing anything because Dr. Paul has talked about it, but Dr. Paul took a phone call from President Trump in April of 2020, right before the nationwide lockdowns. And the president indicated to Dr. Paul that he knew it was a disaster, but he didn't think he could do anything about it. He said, if I don't go along with them, every single death will be blamed on me. So I think that says a lot about him. And you're right, Jim. I don't think he has. He's shown no indication that he's changed.
Mhm.
Has he? Yeah, yeah. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in any national politician. Unfortunately, it's so much of what happens locally is kind of dependent on the national stage nowadays, right? So even though I live here in a small town in Southeast Texas, the town closest to me, I don't even really live in a town. The town closest to me is 2,000 people, right? But there's so much of it that is dependent. I remember looking at the Facebook page of the town, and there were so many people advocating for a Walmart, and I'm like, why do you want a Walmart? Like there's a Walmart 10 minutes down the road. Why do you need one here? Like, why do you want to bring it into this town when there's one 10 minutes down the road? It doesn't make any sense to me. We have mom and pop shops. We have, like family owned, like car repair centers and stuff like that. Like, we're good, man. Like if driving 10 minutes down the road is that big of a hassle to you, I'm sorry. You just move to the next town over where the Walmart is then, because I don't understand what the argument is. But that desire to drive in, to bring in the corporations into the small towns and to overtake these small towns, I find it very disastrous, and it says a lot about the politics of the 2023 American and the way that they look at the world and how they want everything given to them, and they want everything there on demand. And it makes it very, very difficult to have any hope for the way that this is going to work out in any significant manner. You might end up with like small segments of the population, small segments of the country that are able to maneuver properly and keep some of the traditions within their little regions. But I don't think on a national scale we're going to recognize America in the next 15, 20 years.
No, I mean, I live in Lake Jackson. I live about a mile from Dr. Paul. This is Ron Paul country. There's no question about it. Now, Lake Jackson's a bit of an anomaly, and for other reasons that I don't need to mention. But this is Ron Paul country, essentially. On the Saturday of our Ron Paul Institute conference, which is June 3rd, if I wasn't going to that conference, I might be attending, and not as a participant, but the opposite, a pride festival in Lake Jackson with men dressed as women, and it being billed as kid friendly. I mean, this is how bad it's gotten. Lake Jackson, Texas, a rainbow pride festival with men dressed as women, and it's being marketed to children. I can't even say what I think about it, because it would be a problem for your podcast and for me personally, but that just shows how bad the rot is, in my opinion. And if I can just add, as someone said on Twitter recently, yeah, we know that June was Pride Month, whatever. They've been doing it for 20 years. Nobody paid attention. Do your thing, whatever. It's not a big deal. It doesn't affect us. We don't care. But then all of a sudden last year you said, yeah, but how come we can't come for your kids? And that changed everything. And I think that's a good point. That's a good point.
And let me sound an uncharacteristically optimistic note here, and that is that all of what we're seeing here, this whole steady glide into this kind of rainbow tyranny, is from the government authorities and from corporations, is empowered by the existence of the global American empire. And that, that's the whole system of tribute that's set up around the world that keep this Ponzi scheme going. If that collapses internationally, if the dollar no longer rules the world, if America is no longer seen as the unipower that everybody else has to bow to, and I think that is going away one way or the other, then a lot of things could change. Just like obviously things changed in the Soviet Union in 1991 when the whole world communist movement came crashing down. So, I don't rule out that, depending on how things go in Ukraine and whether they manage to blow up the world or what happens in the Taiwan Strait and so forth, that if we reach a point a few years from now, or maybe even sooner than that, where the the perception of American global power no longer is what it was, that could have very profound reverberations back here in the United States for the stability of the system that depends on its quest for global domination. What the result will be rather unpredictable, and it would certainly be not very pleasant to live through, but maybe something good will come out of that. Just like, after 1991, they had a rough period for a decade or more, and then Russia managed to put itself together. Maybe some kind of America can put itself back together again after we go through a similar process. But like I said, it'll take several years, and it won't be pleasant.
I said for a long time that the best we could hope for was a fall similar to the Soviet Union. It was relatively peaceful. I mean, for the most part, considering how we've seen other countries fall.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the division within America, like I feel like the Soviets had some sort of like cohesiveness to them that made it tolerable to kind of divide and separate and do their own things with a collapse. But the division that we see in the United States, I really feel like once this dollar collapses, which I find pretty inevitable, and that it's going to lose its status as the global currency. And once this happens, it's going to get really violent and really bad here in the U.S.
Well, I think, coming
especially
back,
since the Soviet Union had certain. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I mean, and unfortunately, in some ways, the Soviet Union had a certain advantage there because, first off, they actually had a law on secession passed in 1990. There was actually a way that the Soviet Union could come apart in some reasonable way. We don't have any mechanism like that. Also, unlike the United States, the states in the United States, none of them except maybe Texas, possibly Florida, and maybe a couple of others are viable as independent countries, whereas the Soviet republics, to a greater or lesser degree, were more or less had a possible future as independent countries. And then more than anything else is that at least in the Soviet Union, Russians still knew they were Russians, and Georgians were Georgians, and Armenians were Armenians, and so forth. Most Americans don't know who the hell they are. That without our Constitution, without the facade of a Constitution and this structure of federalism, which really doesn't exist anymore either, they don't really know who the hell they are. And they know, I'm a Christian, or I'm white, or I'm black, or whatever. I mean, those are very thin when it comes to national identities and the basis for a new political order rising from the ashes. So there's reason to be pessimistic about that too. It'll be much harder for us, I think, than it was for people in the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the Soviet Union, as you said, they were coming back. We're at the stage that the Soviet Union was in like 1922, right? You had a relatively Christian country, and you had the massive destruction of this entire culture and society, and the forced relocation into a new society. They've gone through that, and they're coming back and they're re-embracing some of that. And of course, that's what Hungary is doing, by the way, as well. And that's why it's also a pariah state. But we're back in like 1920 or 1922 in the Soviet Union, where we are being destroyed. The worms are eating us from within, and we don't understand it. So, I mean, we have a hell of a long way to go now, because I think we're on the destructive phase, and I think the Russians are on the constructive phase. And I know a lot of people Americans have been programmed to be so Russophobic and to hate Russia so much. But I think just objectively, you can see, I noticed an article, I'm sure you guys have seen it. And of course, it's cause for derision in the mainstream media, but Russia is building a village that's friendly for traditional American Christians, because they want to welcome so many American Christians who have a traditional outlook, want to leave the U.S. They want to leave. They don't want to go to Target and learn how to tuck things into places they shouldn't be tucked, right? So Russia is building villages, is building a city for these people, and we always, America always prided itself in a kind of a weird way, like, hey, everyone's trying to get here. Nobody's trying to get to Cuba, they're trying to get here. Well, it looks now that American Christians who are tired of Target and Anheuser-Busch et cetera, are looking to go to places like Russia where they can actually live more Christian lives.
Yeah, like
Yeah, but
almost like refugee status.
except Russia doesn't have a Second Amendment. How could Americans get by without that? That's a deal breaker for me.
Well, you could be a hunter.
Ah.
Well, I have no illusions that Russia is a perfect society, but certainly when you look
No.
at trends, I mean, I'm closer to Hungary, and they also don't have a second amendment.
Yeah, I mean, there's not going to be a perfect society out there. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. You just gotta, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, So if somebody finds that that's where they need to be and that's a better situation for them, then that's definitely what they should do. I don't foresee, I just don't see how this stuff continues. It's to me, it's odd that it's gotten as far as it has. And I'm starting to see that normies, like people that don't really pay attention to politics or the culture war or really understand what's going on, are starting to get fed up. They're like, wait. And I think that's what the whole Bud Light thing was about. I don't think the Bud Light thing was a result of conservatives boycotting Bud Light. I think it was average, normal, everyday people saying, why the hell is this? What does this have to do with my beer?
Yeah.
What does this have to do with me getting off work after working 12 hours, sweating balls all day long? I come home, I want to turn on a basketball game or a football game, drink a beer, and I got to look at this. Like, why?
And these people don't hate gays. They don't care.
They don't care.
They're not hostile. But then all of a sudden, now you make me care and you make me pissed off. Excuse my language.
Right.
And that's a great point. That's a great point, Tommy.
Well, Gavin Newsom sent out a tweet today that the action against Target and Bud Light is an attack on all Americans, and we all should be concerned. I responded it with, first they came for Bud Light, and I said nothing because I don't drink bad beer. Then they came for Target, and I said nothing because I don't wear kids' clothes. And now we're coming after you, LA Dodgers. So let's hope that let's hope that there is something. They have gone a little too far. All the more reason, again, why they need to maybe take a step back for just prudential reasons. They're stupid and they're evil, but they're not completely crazy.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Daniel said earlier, like everything was all fine and dandy until you came for the kids. And even my wife, whose best friend for the last 25 years has been gay, like, and she's like, what the hell are they doing this? Why are they worried about what is going on with the kid thing? Like, that's weird. And I'm like, yeah, that's weird. Like, there's no reason for it. And she's not near as doesn't have near the conservative mentality as I do, but she still's like, no, nope, stay away from the kids. And we're talking about a woman who's never had a kid. She doesn't have her own children, and she even sees it and goes, nah. And so they've crossed a line, and I don't think they realized, maybe they realized that it was going to cause problems, but I don't think they realized it was going to cause as many problems as it did. I think the digital world we live in now, where information is so freely put out there and it flows so quickly, it caught them off guard that so many people found out so fast what was going on. And that they thought they could kind of get their heels dug in a little bit more. And I think that's where COVID kind of backfired on them too, with the lockdowns, because parents were engaging more with the children's schoolwork. And so parents started seeing these subjects pop up and they're like, why is this in school? What the hell does this have to do with education? Like, what is this?
I often miss Justin Raimondo, and I wish he were here to write about this, because I think he would rip it all to shreds. It's a shame that he's not with us still.
Yeah. You do wonder how this works just at the kind of the micro level, though. I mean, if you're some corporate executive or an advertising person in one of these corporations, and you say, what are we going to do now this month to help promote our product? I know, drag queens. Nobody's done it. It's so new and fresh. What makes them sort of go down into this? Obviously there are a million possibilities they could think of, but they come back with the same old thing all the time, like there's something magical about it. It's just very peculiar to me how anybody makes that decision. But somebody obviously does. You think somebody would say, let's do drag queens, and at least other people would say, it's been done. But they don't. They say, let's just trot out the same old thing. I don't get it.
Well, I think it was Charlize Theron that came out a while back and said everybody's life is better because of drag queens. And I was like, really? Like drag queens have had no impact on my life whatsoever. Like none. Like the only thing I knew about drag queens is there was some show that I never watched called RuPaul's Drag Race, and I didn't care about it.
Yeah.
And then I found out there were drag queens in a 6-year-old's class with the 6-year-old sitting on the dude's lap, and I'm like, hey, that's an issue.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in San Francisco. I know what that culture is like, and hey, what you do in your own privacy it's not my business. But the weird thing that Jim, for what you said, I'm like Tommy. I live out here in Texas, and I work from home, and I have a TV studio with Dr. Paul, and I don't interact with people. I'm like, I don't know, like Rumpelstiltskin or something. I mean, I'm just a Rip Van Winkle. But these last couple of days, someone backed into my car, right? And I've had to deal with an insurance company and a collision repair company. And both of them are very, very large corporate entities. And I have to say, it's been such a wake-up call, because literally the very language that they use when I talk to them is incomprehensible to me. It's like the langue de bois, or the Hungarians called it the fanyelv, the wooden language of communism. They all use these same phrases and phraseology. And I literally had to say to the woman from my insurance company, I'm sorry, I don't understand a thing you've just told me. So corporate America is I don't know how to describe it. Is it stupid? I don't know, but it's a different world than we live in. They don't make any sense.
Yeah. Okay, I thought Jim had something to say. I was just waiting.
No.
That delay is kind of annoying a little bit, but that's all right. I saw you move, and I was like, is he trying to talk?
I'm sorry to personalize it, but it's been a real wake-up call for me.
No,
I literally, please say it to me in English.
Right. No, I get what you're saying, because I was driving over the road for years, and then I came and I started working local, and the company I work for, it's a Texas company. It's a fairly small lumber company that has locations around Texas, and they always put them outside of the big cities because they don't feel like they can compete with Home Depot and Lowe's within the city. So they go on the outskirts. Right. And we had some training the other day, and I'm reading it, and it's a survey, and I'm like, what is this crap, man? We work in a lumber store. Like, what are
your pronouns?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, do you respect like people no matter how they live their lives? And I'm like, and it's like yes or no. And I'm like, well, it's not that easy. Like, are they going to leave kids alone? Yeah. That's the first question I got for them. Like, sure, as long as they don't jack with me, and if it's some dude wearing a dress, like a short skirt with high heels with this bright pink lipstick on and a beard, no, that's not normal, and I'm not going to pretend it is, right?
And don't put him in charge of our nuclear secrets like that one guy.
Exactly.
Hey, what could go wrong?
Yeah, that dude.
In the Soviet Union, even into the 1980s, a lot of rural areas did not have indoor plumbing, but they did have electrification as early as the 1920s. And the reason is you can't put propaganda through a water pipe. And it was very important for them to get modern means of communication out of the countryside for propaganda reasons. And of course, we've now taken that to the nth degree. You look, we can talk about, communities forming in local rural areas, some kind of resistance there, but I think we underestimate the extent to which everybody, one way or the other, has been propagandized, because we are living in a global village online. We do, people in rural areas, no more than any place else, live on their cell phones all day long.
Mhm.
And I don't know that, especially as we get into things like transhumanism, artificial intelligence, that the entire human psyche is being transformed. And it's not just in the cities, it's everywhere. And how that's changing things, I don't think we can even begin to estimate.
I live right outside of Vidor, Texas, which was for many years was touted as the last of the sundown towns. And I go, if I even go to the Walmart there, probably I'll run into 3 or 4 kids working there that are non-binary or blah, blah, blah. And you can tell by the way that they kind of hold themselves, they dress, they do. And you're like, all right, yeah, this dude is wearing eyeshadow and lipstick and like, okay. And it's weird. It's just strange to see in a small country town like Vidor that, yeah, you're right. The propaganda has spread so far and wide, and parents are, I think they distracted the parents with work, forcing the two both parents working in the household, having to take care in order to afford, and running the inflation up to a degree where both parents had to work in order to afford to live. And so that distracted the parents, handed the children over to daycares and the public education system, in which the daycare and the public education system really were raising the children. And now the parents are seeing this stuff happen, and they're like, okay, well, I went through phases when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But they don't recognize that this phase that your kid is going through is ideologically driven, and they're possessed by an ideology.
And it can end with,
it's almost like cultish. I'm sorry, that was like the last thing I had to say.
No, you're right. I mean, it can end with body parts being chopped off, and you can't reattach those things. Absolutely not. Yeah.
But
yeah,
hey,
of course, a lot of this. Go tell me.
No, go ahead, Jim. I was just going to say we've been going an hour. I don't want to keep y'all too much longer.
Yeah. No, and of course, all of this relates to what it sort of lurks behind it. I mean, America used to be a fairly straight-laced Christian country in many respects, predominantly Protestant country. And now it's, a lot of these kids are just completely unchurched. And frankly, the churches they're not going to are not worth much anyway in many cases. Yeah. So it's that's a problem there too, is that really, John Adams used to say that America's constitution was made for a moral and religious people and was unfit for the governance of any other. Well, QED. I think you can write fini at the end of that experiment that, and let's be frank. I mean, 250 years run for a republic is not bad by historical standards. So the idea that it's all coming apart is not something I think that we despair over or pretend isn't happening. We just say, okay, this historical progression has got us where we are. Let's see what comes next, but let's not kid ourselves.
That's what I was going to say before I forgot what I was going to say, Jim, which is that, and this is for another discussion. This is a discussion that you and I have had many times, but I think it all did start with the destruction of the churches. And I know my own church was destroyed starting in the late 1950s. And a lot of Protestantism has been destroyed as well. And I know, Jim, in your area, there are a lot of usurpers that are eyeing things. And so you have to I mean, when I go back to Virginia, I see all the churches with the flags, the rainbow flags. Everybody's welcome. Everybody's fine. Everyone's okay. You had to destroy the churches first. And I think they definitely did a good job of that starting in 1958, at least for my folks.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't understand. Like, I know my grandpa, who's no longer with us, but I know if he would have seen all the stuff that's going on, and it would have like infiltrated his church, there's no way he would have stood for it. Like no way. And I'm like, and I see like these Protestant churches, like Pentecostal church. I saw one that was doing like had this transgender giving communion, and I'm like, what is this? Like what is, like who's going to this church? Like anybody I know that grew up in the church that were to witness this happening in front of their eyes, they would walk out.
Yeah.
They would throw a fit, and they'd be like, no, this is not what we're here for. You know, we're not here to make you feel good. We're here to worship God. You know, like we're here to get closer to God, not for you. Like, and it's just, it's this real insane perversion of what religion is.
Treacherous times, gentlemen.
But hey, Jim, you want to plug away? You got anything you want to plug?
No, not really. I stopped writing years ago. In fact, the only thing I've written was the last 2 times that Daniel asked me to speak at the Scholars Seminar at the Ron Paul Institute, and I forced myself to write because my muse has deserted me, and I just don't write anymore. I can come on to speak. You know, anybody can blab like this, and so I'm still up for that. But other than Twitter, which is my only social medium, at Jim Jatras, I don't really have much of a public profile, and I hope to keep it that way.
All right.
Though I am saying I am assembling a book of my past writings, tentatively entitled "I Tried to Warn You."
Classic. Oh my God.
Daniel?
That's Jim's speeches to our scholars were fantastic, and I think you can find them on Rumble because they were just absolutely great. But you know, we're still doing the Ron Paul Institute. This is our 10th year. RonPaulInstitute.org. We do every day the Ron Paul Liberty Report live on Rumble at noon Eastern time. And we do have a conference coming up on June 3rd in Houston, Texas, and information on that is available on our website, ronpaulinstitute.org. So we keep trying. Jim, I suffer from what you suffer. I have a difficult time writing these days, but I do blab every day on the Liberty Report.
Well, I was planning on. I had tentatively made plans to come to that conference on June 3rd, but it happens to be the same day my wife is landing, coming back from England. So I will be in Houston, but I will be on the other side of Houston.
Yeah. Next time.
Definitely. Yeah. A buddy of mine texted me. He's like, "Did you know this was going to happen?" I was like, "Well, I do now. So thank you." But yeah, it just happened to be that it fell on the same day my wife was landing. So, but hey guys, I really appreciate y'all coming on. This will be coming out, like I said, next Thursday. And so really do appreciate it. And I hope we can do this again. Maybe dive into that church subject and really like kind of dissect that madness.
Sounds great. Well, it's very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice to spend an evening with you, gentlemen. I'm going to go eat some salad and some
Do
fish.
it.
Yeah,
End the recording.
wonderful company, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Good night.
Good.